Each year, more than 16,000 aircraft disappearances and unexplained incidents are reported across North American airspace, with a disproportionate concentration occurring within a specific region of Alaska that has earned the ominous designation of VOL, the Alaskan Triangle, among aviation safety investigators and military personnel alike. This remote wilderness area, stretching from Juneau to Anchorage to Barrow, and encompassing over 500,000 square miles of some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth, has claimed more lives per capita than the Bermuda Triangle, with search and rescue operations conducted by the Alaska Air National Guard reporting a staggering 47% failure rate in locating missing aircraft, even with modern GPS technology and satellite tracking systems. During the height of Cold War operations, and continuing through the post-9/11's military expansion, Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage became one of the most strategically critical installations in North America, with thousands of flight hours logged annually over territories where compasses spin wildly. Communication systems fail without explanation, and experienced pilots report phenomena that simply shouldn't exist according to everything we understand about aviation and physics. For a brief period in March of 2004, one routine medical evacuation flight would encounter something so impossibly terrifying in the frozen skies above the Talkeetna Mountains that it would force the Department of Defense to establish an entirely new classification protocol for incidents that defy rational explanation. But what exactly happened to the 4-person crew of Dustoff 79er during those 18 missing hours? And why did their Black Hawk helicopter return to base 3 days later, flying itself with perfect precision, while every single seat inside remained buckled tight around empty air where human beings should have been? The Alaskan Triangle encompasses a vast wilderness region of approximately 580,000 square miles, stretching across territories where summer temperatures barely reach 50 degrees Fahrenheit and winter conditions plunge to 60 below zero, creating an environment so hostile that entire mountain ranges remain unmapped and valleys exist where no human being has ever set foot, despite centuries of exploration and modern satellite surveillance technology. The region's unique geography creates bizarre atmospheric conditions where the Arctic Circle's magnetic anomalies intersect with extreme weather patterns, geothermal activity from dozens of active volcanoes, and terrain so varied that pilots can experience clear skies, whiteout blizzards, and severe turbulence within the span of 15 minutes, making it perhaps the most dangerous aviation environment in the entire Western Hemisphere. The combination of these factors, along with vast stretches of wilderness where rescue operations become nearly impossible once darkness falls and temperatures drop, has resulted in more than 20,000 documented disappearances since Alaska achieved statehood in 1959, with search and rescue teams recovering bodies or wreckage in less than 30% of cases, despite increasingly sophisticated technology and unlimited military resources dedicated to finding missing personnel. It is perhaps unsurprising then that this specific region has accumulated more unexplained phenomena reports per square mile than any other location in North America, with incident files dating back decades containing accounts that military investigators have quietly categorized as beyond conventional explanation and stored in classified archives that even Freedom of Information Act requests cannot penetrate. The indigenous Tlingit people, who have inhabited these lands for more than 10,000 years, possess oral histories describing entities they call Kushtaka, or land otter men, shape-shifting beings that appear in the fog and ice to lure travelers into the wilderness where they vanish completely, leaving behind only scattered personal belongings and footprints that end abruptly, as if the person had been plucked from the ground by invisible hands reaching down from the sky itself. Ancient petroglyphs discovered in caves throughout the Talkeetna mountain range, some carbon dated to over 3,000 years old, depict humanoid figures with elongated arms that stretch impossibly across the sky, their hands large enough to encompass entire hunting parties, while other carvings show what appear to be flying vessels being grasped by these massive appendages and carried toward, symbols that researchers have interpreted as representing the space between worlds or the place where the sky opens. Russian fur traders in the 1800s documented encounters with what they termed Nebesnaya Ruka, or the sky hand, in their expedition journals, describing massive shadow forms that would descend through cloud cover during storms and reach toward their ships with fingers that seemed to be composed of darkness itself, solid enough to cast shadows, but intangible when men tried to strike at them with axes or fire muskets at the approaching appendages. These historical accounts, dismissed for centuries as superstition born from isolation and harsh conditions, share disturbing similarities in their descriptions of how victims were taken, always during periods of poor visibility, always leaving behind secured belongings, as if people had been surgically extracted from their clothing or restraints, and always occurring in the same general region where modern disappearances now cluster with statistical impossibility. Military records that have been partially declassified reveal a disturbing pattern of incidents involving aircraft that extends back to World War II, when the U.S. Army established cold weather training facilities throughout Alaska and began losing planes at rates that exceeded combat losses in active war zones by a factor of 3 to 1 in certain sectors. In October of 1972, House Majority Leader Halle Boggs was traveling aboard a Cessna 310 with Congressman Nick Begich when their aircraft vanished completely between Anchorage and Juneau. Despite perfect weather conditions, clear visibility, and constant radio contact, until the moment all communication ceased mid-sentence, as if someone had simply switched off reality itself. The largest search and rescue operation in American history, at that time involving 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, and over 400 personnel searching for 39 days, found absolutely nothing, no wreckage, no debris field, no emergency beacon signals, not even an oil slick on the water where the plane should have gone down based on its last known position and fuel calculations. Investigators noted in sealed reports that radar tracking showed the aircraft maintaining stable flight at 7,000 feet before the return. Signal didn't fade or descend, but rather compressed into a singular point and ceased to exist. Language that appeared in 3 other incident reports from the same region involving military helicopters between 1985 and 1999. Similar encounters were reported by C-130 crews conducting surveillance operations along the Arctic coast, with multiple pilots describing shadow formations that paced their aircraft at impossible speeds before communications equipment would fail, navigation systems would spin uselessly, and crew members would experience lost time. Missions scheduled for 4 hours would conclude after 8 hours had passed, yet fuel consumption indicated only 4 hours of flight time, and no crew member could account for the missing period, despite all of them reporting an overwhelming sensation of being watched by something vast and incomprehensibly ancient that existed just beyond the edge of human perception. March 17, 2004, 14:45 hours. Captain Rebecca Hawk Salisbury lifted dust off 7-9er off the tarmac at Elmendorf Air Force Base under conditions that should have made for a textbook medical evacuation flight, with ceiling visibility at 12,000 feet, winds calm at 8 knots, and temperature holding steady at 32 degrees Fahrenheit as the UH-60 Black Hawk banked northeast toward a mining camp in the Talkeetna Mountains, where a contract worker had suffered severe injuries in a drilling accident and required immediate transport to Anchorage Regional Hospital for emergency surgery. Salisbury, a 12-year veteran with over 3,000 flight hours in Alaskan conditions and a reputation for bringing birds home through weather that grounded pilots half her age, ran through her pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision that had earned her call sign, while her co-pilot, First Lieutenant James Brenner, a former Army aviator who had flown Black Hawks in Afghanistan before transferring to Air National Guard rescue operations, verified their flight path and established radio contact with the mining operations landing coordinator. In the crew compartment behind them, Staff Sergeant Louis Vega, known universally as Gage for his uncanny ability to diagnose mechanical problems by sound alone, performed his equipment checks on the medical supplies and stretcher rigging, while Petty Officer Second Class Amy Thornton, a Navy corpsman on temporary assignment who had served 3 deployments providing battlefield medicine in Iraq, reviewed the patient's preliminary condition report and prepared her trauma kit for what the mine foreman had described as extensive crush injuries to the lower torso and possible internal bleeding. The flight should have taken 42 minutes each way, a routine run that crews from Elmendorf executed an average of 18 times per month. And as 79er climbed to cruising altitude of 8,000 feet, and Salisbury engaged the autopilot for the straightforward northeastern vector, none of the 4 people aboard had any reason to suspect they were about to experience something that would cause the United States military to question the very nature of reality itself. 26 minutes into the flight, as the Black Hawk crossed over the southern edge of Denali State Park, with the snow-covered peaks of the Alaska Range stretching endlessly in every direction like frozen waves on a white ocean, Gage noticed something unusual in the rotor noise, not a mechanical issue exactly, but rather a change in the way the sound was traveling, as if the air itself had become denser, or the acoustic properties of the atmosphere had somehow shifted in a way that shouldn't be physically possible at their current altitude and atmospheric pressure. He mentioned it over the intercom, almost casually, the kind of observation that experienced crew members share without alarm. But Salisbury's response died mid-sentence as every electrical system on the aircraft began to flicker simultaneously, the GPS display cycling through random coordinates that placed them everywhere from the North Pole to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the radio producing a sound that Brenner would later describe in his testimony as like 1,000 voices trying to speak at once through a tunnel made of static and wind, and most disturbingly, the compass spinning in complete circles as if magnetic north had ceased to exist or was somehow rotating around them at impossible speeds. The temperature gauge inside the cabin dropped 17 degrees in less than 30 seconds, despite the heating system running at full capacity, and Thornton noticed that her breath had become visible in the air, while frost patterns began spreading across the inside of the windows in designs that looked less like random crystallization and more like deliberate symbols or ancient writing that seemed to shift and reform whenever she tried to focus on individual shapes. Salisbury immediately disengaged the autopilot and took manual control, her training overriding the instinctive fear that had started crawling up her spine like ice water. But when she attempted to radio their situation back to Elmendorf, the only response was that same chorus of overlapping voices that seemed to be saying something in a language that predated human speech, followed by a sound that Gage would later tell military investigators reminded him a heartbeat, but massive, like something the size of a mountain was breathing in rhythm with our rotor blades. Within 90 seconds, the situation deteriorated from unusual to impossible as the Black Hawk entered what appeared to be a cloud formation that shouldn't have existed given the clear weather conditions they had been monitoring since takeoff. A massive wall of darkness that rose from the sea, ground to at least 20,000 feet, stretching across their flight path like a curtain, made of smoke and shadow that seemed to be somehow thicker than normal clouds, more substantial, as if they were approaching not moisture vapor, but rather a physical barrier between their world and somewhere else entirely. Salisbury pulled collective to gain altitude and attempted to climb above the formation, but as 79er ascended, the cloud mass rose with them, maintaining perfect pace with their climb rate, as if it were intelligently matching their every maneuver. And when Brenner suggested they bank hard left to circumvent the anomaly, they discovered to their absolute horror that the darkness had somehow surrounded them completely during the previous 30 seconds. Without anyone noticing its approach, they were now flying through the center of a sphere of shadow that had no visible edges and seemed to extend infinitely in every direction, despite the GPS altitude reading showing they were still at only 9,200 feet. The light inside the cabin took on a sickly gray quality that made everyone's skin look corpse pale, and Thornton began to smell something that her mind struggled to categorize. A combination of ozone, like after a lightning strike, mixed with something organic and ancient, like the smell of caves that hadn't been opened in millennia, combined with an almost metallic scent that reminded her disturbingly of blood that had been exposed to sub-zero temperatures. Gage reported that the rotor sounds were now completely wrong than normal rhythmic, chopping replaced by something that sounded muffled and distant, as if they were flying underwater. And he could feel through the deck plating that the vibration patterns had changed in ways that suggested the aircraft was somehow no longer fully connected to normal physical space, as if the Black Hawk was partially existing in some other dimension, where different laws of physics applied, and solid matter became negotiable. Then Salisbury screamed, not a sound of fear, but of pure shocked disbelief, because something was appearing outside her side window, and when the other 3 crew members turned to look at what had caused their unflappable pilot to break her professional composure, they saw it too, a shape in the darkness outside the aircraft, vast and impossible, that their minds initially tried to interpret as terrain or another aircraft or weather phenomena, but which their eyes kept insisting was actually an appendage. Something like a hand, but scaled to proportions that made no sense, with fingers each the size of subway cars that were composed of shadow and substance, simultaneously reaching through the darkness toward their fragile machine, with the slow, deliberate movement of something that had all the time in the world because it existed outside of time entirely. And as those impossible digits closed around the Black Hawk, like a parent's hand gently encompassing a child's toy, the last thing 79er's emergency beacon transmitted before all signals ceased was Salisbury's voice, no longer screaming, but speaking with the flat affect of someone whose mind has encountered something so far beyond human experience that emotion becomes irrelevant, saying simply, "It's taking us. It's taking us somewhere else. Tell my daughter that," and in nothing but silence, stretching across 18 hours of missing time, that 4 people would never remember, and the United States Air Force would spend the next decade trying desperately to explain away. The moment Dustoff 79er failed to check in at its scheduled waypoint 17 minutes after entering the Talkeetna Mountain Corridor, Elmendorf Air Force Base launched immediate search protocols that had been refined through decades of Alaskan rescue operations, with Command Chief Master Sergeant Victor Paulson, a 28-year veteran who had coordinated over 400 successful recoveries in conditions ranging from whiteout blizzards to complete mechanical failures, establishing a search perimeter based on 79er's last confirmed GPS coordinates and fuel range calculations that should have made locating the aircraft a matter of hours at most, given the clear weather and sophisticated tracking technology available to modern military search and rescue operations. Within 40 minutes, 3 HH-60 Pave Hawks were airborne, along with 2 C-130 Hercules aircraft equipped with advanced infrared detection systems capable of identifying heat signatures from downed aircraft through cloud cover and darkness, while satellite imaging was redirected to scan every square mile of the projected flight path using technology that could theoretically detect objects as small as a basketball from orbital altitude. But as the first golden hour of search operations stretched into a second, and then a third with absolutely no emergency beacon signals, no infrared signatures, no radar returns, and no visual confirmation despite perfect visibility that allowed pilots to see for 70 miles in every direction across the snow-covered wilderness, Paulson found himself confronting a reality that his decades of experience had not prepared him for. Dustoff 79er had not crashed, had not diverted to an alternate landing site, had not suffered catastrophic systems failure that would have left some kind of debris field, but had instead simply ceased to exist, as if the aircraft and its 4-person crew had been surgically removed from reality itself without leaving so much as a fuel vapor trail to mark their passage through the sky. By hour 6, with Coast Guard vessels searching Prince William Sound in case, 79er had somehow catastrophically changed course and gone down over water, and Civil Air Patrol volunteers combing grid patterns across 12,000 square miles of wilderness. Paulson made the call that no search coordinator ever wants to make. He requested that the Alaska Air National Guard's Classified Anomaly Response Unit be briefed on the situation. The small team of intelligence specialists and scientists, whose official designation never appeared in any public records, and whose entire purpose was to investigate incidents in Alaskan airspace that defied conventional explanation and potentially posed national security implications. That extended beyond simple aircraft accidents. Major Sarah Kwan, the lead analyst for the Anomaly Response Unit and a former astrophysicist who had transitioned from NASA to military intelligence after becoming frustrated with what she called the institutional refusal to acknowledge data that doesn't fit established models, arrived at Elmendorf's Operations Center at 0200 hours on March 18th and immediately began cross-referencing 79er's disappearance against a database that officially did not exist, a compilation of 73 previous incidents in Alaskan airspace dating back to 1952 that shared specific characteristics, including sudden loss of all communications, GPS anomalies immediately prior to disappearance, reports of unusual atmospheric conditions or visual phenomena from nearby aircraft, and most significantly, the complete absence of any physical evidence, despite exhaustive search operations conducted. Under ideal conditions, she discovered that 79er had vanished within a 15-mile radius of where a Coast Guard helicopter had disappeared in 1987. A private Cessna had gone missing in 1994, and a military cargo plane had reported severe electromagnetic interference and visual contact with unidentified aerial mass in 1999 before managing to successfully exit the area with significant compass and navigation system damage that mechanics had been unable to explain even after replacing every electronic component on the aircraft. Kwan pulled archived files that had been scanned from original typed reports and found testimony from the 1999 incident's pilot describing a presence in the clouds that seemed aware of us. That moved with intention rather than following weather patterns, and that produced a sensation of being observed by something so vast that our aircraft was less significant than an insect flying past a human being's face. Even more disturbing, she located partially declassified Russian intelligence documents from the Cold War era that referenced the same general region as Zona Tishiny, or the Zone of Silence, where Soviet reconnaissance flights had reported similar disappearances of their own aircraft and had established strict flight protocols that routed all military traffic at least 50 miles around the affected area. With one translated document from 1968 containing the phrase "Ni razbadet ruku," which her interpreter explained meant "do not wake the hand," though the context for this warning had been completely redacted from the file. By dawn on March 18th, Kwan had assembled a pattern that suggested 79er had not suffered a random accident, but had instead encountered something that had been operating in Alaskan airspace for decades, if not centuries. Something that displayed characteristics of intelligence selectivity and purposes that remained completely opaque to human understanding, despite the best efforts of military scientists and intelligence analysts who had been quietly studying these incidents for over 50 years. At 13:15 hours on March 20th, 3 full days after Dustoff 79er had vanished, Staff Sergeant Derek Hutchins was conducting routine morning inspections of the Elmendorf flight line when he noticed something that made him stop mid-stride and question whether exhaustion from 72 hours of search operations had finally caught up with him and produced a full-scale hallucination. Sitting on Pad 7, exactly where it had departed 96 hours earlier, was a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter with tail number 79er painted clearly on its fuselage, landed with perfect precision in the designated parking configuration, with rotors stationary and all external. Lights dark as if it had been there overnight, and the entire base had somehow failed to notice its return. Hutchins activated his radio with hands that had started to shake violently, his voice cracking as he reported the impossible sight to operations. And within minutes, the area was swarmed by security personnel, crash crews, and investigators who approached the silent aircraft with weapons drawn and biohazard protocols active, because nobody could explain how a helicopter that had been the subject of the largest aerial search in Alaskan history had simply reappeared on its home base without anyone seeing or hearing it arrive, without triggering any perimeter alarms or radar tracking, and without any visible damage to its exterior that would indicate where it had been or what it had experienced during its missing days. Major Kwan arrived within 8 minutes and immediately ordered that nobody touch the aircraft until full documentation could be completed. And as photographers circled 7-9er capturing images from every angle, she noticed details that sent ice water flooding through her veins, despite her years of training in maintaining analytical objectivity. The landing skids had compressed the tarmac in a pattern that indicated the aircraft's full weight plus fuel load, meaning it had not been towed or placed there by external means. The engine housings were cool, but not cold, suggesting shutdown had occurred within the previous 3 to 4 hours. And most impossibly, there was frost covering the entire exterior of the fuselage in patterns that meteorologists would later confirm could not form naturally at Elmendorf's current temperature and humidity levels. Frost that seemed to concentrate most heavily around the crew compartment doors, as if something very cold had paid particular attention to the sections of the aircraft where human beings would normally be seated. When the decision was finally made to open the helicopter, after 2 hours of external documentation, Master Sergeant Paulson personally volunteered to be first inside, and what he found in the crew compartment would haunt him for the remainder of his career. 4 seats, arranged exactly as they should be, 4 flight helmets resting on the deck where they had apparently fallen, 4 sets of flight gear, including survival vests and cold weather equipment, all present and accounted for. But most horrifyingly, all 4 seat harnesses were still fastened in their locked positions, with the belt webbing still formed in the exact shape of human torsos and legs, as if whoever had been wearing them had been somehow extracted straight through the secured straps without unbuckling them, leaving behind perfectly preserved impressions of bodies that were no longer there and had left absolutely no trace of how they had departed from. Restraints specifically designed to keep people secured during crashes and turbulence that would tear normal clothing to pieces. Major Kwan ordered Dustoff 7-9er transported immediately to Hangar 18, a classified facility at the far end of Elmendorf's restricted operations zone where aircraft involved in unexplained incidents were taken for analysis away from the standard maintenance crews and curious personnel who might ask uncomfortable questions that the Air Force had no intention of answering publicly. And as the Black Hawk was carefully towed across the tarmac under armed guard with tarps covering its exterior to prevent unauthorized observation, she assembled a team of specialists that included forensic investigators from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, electromagnetic specialists from a contractor company whose name appeared on no public records, and Dr. Marcus Audenkirk, a psychologist and neuroscientist who had spent 15 years studying altered states of consciousness and trauma-induced memory suppression for a Pentagon research program that officially did not exist. Inside the climate-controlled hangar, with armed security posted at every entrance and all personnel required to surrender recording devices and sign non-disclosure agreements, carrying penalties of 20 years federal imprisonment, the investigation team began systematic analysis of every surface system and component of 7-9er, looking for any physical evidence that might explain where the aircraft had been for 3 days and what had happened to its crew. The initial findings were disturbing enough. Chemical analysis of the frost patterns revealed water composition that contained trace isotopes not found naturally in Earth's atmosphere, suggesting the ice had formed from precipitation that originated somewhere with fundamentally different environmental conditions, while electromagnetic readings throughout the crew compartment showed residual field distortions that persisted even 72 hours after the aircraft's return, creating areas where compass needles would spin wildly and electronic devices would experience timing errors as if localized space-time had been stretched or compressed and hadn't fully returned to normal dimensional stability. But it was Dr. Odenkirk who made the discovery that would transform this incident from unexplained disappearance into evidence of something so profoundly disturbing that it would ultimately require presidential-level security classification. When he used ultraviolet forensic lights to examine the interior surfaces, he found handprints, dozens of them pressed against every window and bulkhead with such force that they had left impressions in the metal paneling, handprints that had been made from the inside by crew members desperately trying to escape or signal for help. And the chemical analysis of the oils and residue left by these prints showed elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels so extreme that Odenkirk stated flatly that the people who made these marks had experienced terror beyond anything in his 15 years of studying. Combat trauma and psychological extremes. Terror so intense that their bodies had dumped stress hormones at levels that should have caused immediate cardiac arrest in healthy adults. Yet they had apparently survived long enough to make multiple prints, suggesting hours of sustained panic rather than a single moment of shock. The breakthrough came on March 22nd, when Technical Sergeant Riley Carmichael, an avionics specialist with 20 years of experience maintaining Black Hawk flight systems, discovered that 79er's onboard camera system standard equipment on all search and rescue aircraft for documentation purposes and post-incident analysis had remained powered and recording throughout the entire period of disappearance, despite all other electrical systems showing complete failure during the event. The cameras used independent battery systems and solid-state storage that could function even during total electrical system collapse. And when Carmichael carefully extracted the storage modules and transferred their contents to isolated computer systems in a shielded laboratory environment, Major Kwan found herself watching footage that would ultimately be classified at levels requiring special access programs clearance and would result in immediate psychiatric evaluation for any analyst who viewed it without proper psychological preparation and support. The footage began normally showing routine cockpit operations as Captain Salisbury and Lieutenant Brenner flew their approach vector, but at timestamp 15 hours 11 minutes and 43 seconds, the cameras captured the moment when all instruments began failing and the darkness engulfed the aircraft. And what the automated systems recorded during the following 18 hours would challenge every assumption about reality that the assembled investigators had carried through their entire careers. The external cameras mounted on the nose and tail of the aircraft to provide situational awareness during rescues showed the massive hand-like appendage emerging from the surrounding shadow, and the clarity of the footage shot in high definition with automatic light compensation revealed details that made several analysts leave the screening room to vomit when they first witnessed what had been captured. The appendage was not metaphorical or symbolic, but terrifyingly literal, a hand-like structure the size of a football field, composed of something that seemed to exist simultaneously as solid matter and as absence of matter with surfaces that reflected no light, while somehow still being visible and with 5 distinct digits that moved with the deliberate precision of something performing a delicate task rather than the random movements of natural phenomena. As the fingers closed around 79er, the cameras captured the aircraft being lifted, not tilted or thrown or buffeted by wind, but carefully grasped and raised as if something impossibly vast was examining it with the same curiosity that a human child might show toward an ant discovered on a sidewalk, and the altitude readings visible on the cockpit displays showed the helicopter ascending from 9,000 feet to 73,000 feet in approximately 8 minutes, an altitude where the air should have been too thin to support rotor flight, and where the temperature should have been minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, yet the cameras showed the rotors continuing to spin and frost continuing to form, as if normal atmospheric conditions somehow persisted inside whatever bubble of altered reality the hand had created around the aircraft. The internal cabin cameras captured footage that would result in 3 of the viewing analysts requiring immediate psychological intervention and 1 attempting suicide 6 months later after recurring nightmares about what he had witnessed on the recordings. It showed Captain Salisbury, Lieutenant Brenner, Staff Sergeant Vega, and Petty Officer Thornton experiencing something that Dr. Odenkirk could only describe as conscious extraction, their bodies remaining physically present in their seats with harnesses securely fastened, while something that the cameras could only partially capture seemed to be pulling their awareness, their consciousness, their essential selves out through some mechanism that human neuroscience had no framework to explain. The footage showed all 4 crew members simultaneously entering states of extreme distress, their bodies convulsing against the restraints, while their eyes rolled back, showing only whites, their mouths opening in screams that the audio systems captured as sounds that resembled human vocalization, but contained harmonic frequencies that acoustic analysis revealed included infrasound below 20 hertz and ultrasound above 20,000 hertz, frequencies that should not have been producible by human vocal cords, and that had measurable physical effects on the recording equipment itself, causing microphones to overload and speaker systems that later played back the audio to crack and shatter from the resonance. The cameras captured approximately 4 hours of this state before the crew members suddenly went limp and still, their vital signs measurable through smartwatch devices. 3 of them wore showing heart rates and brain activity patterns that matched deep coma states. And then for the remaining 14 hours of missing time, the footage showed only their empty bodies strapped into seats with expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces, while the external cameras continued to record the hand holding the aircraft suspended at impossible altitude, surrounded by darkness that occasionally parted to reveal glimpses of something beyond vast geometric structures. It seemed to extend infinitely in directions that shouldn't exist, lights that moved in patterns suggesting cities or perhaps circuitry on an incomprehensible scale, and other appendages, dozens of them, reaching through the darkness toward other objects that the camera resolution couldn't quite resolve, but that resembled aircraft from different eras and possibly different origins, as if whatever existed in that impossible space collected flying machines the way humans collect butterflies, pinning them carefully in display cases. It existed outside normal space-time, where the specimens could be examined and studied without time passing for them in any meaningful way. Then at timestamp 9 hours 47 minutes and 19 seconds on March 20th, the footage showed the hand opening, releasing 7-9er, and the cameras captured approximately 8 seconds of freefall before the helicopter's automated systems somehow restarted themselves and executed a perfect autonomous landing sequence that deposited the aircraft exactly where it had departed 3 days earlier. And in the final frames before the systems powered down, the external cameras captured one last image that Major Kwan ordered sealed under classification protocols that would keep it hidden for minimum 50 years. The massive hand receding back into clouds that shouldn't have existed over Elmendorf Air Force Base. And in the brief moment before it disappeared completely, the thumb and index finger of that impossible appendage came together in what every single person who viewed the footage unanimously described as an unmistakable gesture, a universal signal that transcended species and culture and reality itself. The entity that had taken 4 human beings and returned their bodies after removing something essential from within them was waving goodbye with casual friendliness that was somehow more terrifying than any aggressive action could have been, because it suggested that whatever had done this considered the entire encounter unremarkable, routine, perhaps even affectionate in its own incomprehensible way. Within 6 hours of Major Kwan's team completing their analysis of the camera footage, Elmendorf Air Force Base received visitors who arrived without advance notice or standard diplomatic protocol. A delegation of 9 individuals in civilian clothing who presented credentials identifying them as representatives of a joint Department of Defense and National Security Agency task force with authority that superseded normal chain of command and required immediate compliance from all military personnel, regardless of rank or security clearance level. The lead official, who identified himself only as Mr. Garrison, and whose credentials bore classification markings that Major Kwan had never encountered in 15 years of handling sensitive military intelligence, immediately ordered Hangar 18 sealed and placed under armed guard with shoot-to-kill authorization for any unauthorized personnel attempting to approach within 200 meters. And he informed Base Commander Colonel Patricia Vance that operational control of the 7-9er incident had been transferred to federal authority under provisions of classified executive orders signed during the Eisenhower administration and never rescinded or made public in the 70 years since their creation. Garrison brought with him specialists whose expertise covered disciplines that seemed deliberately assembled for this exact scenario: structural engineers, who began analyzing every component of 7-9er with equipment that measured dimensional stability and space-time coherence. Medical personnel who collected every biological sample that could be recovered from the crew compartment, including skin cells, hair follicles, and the sweat residue from inside flight helmets. And most disturbingly, a team of what Garrison described as cognitive security specialists, whose actual function became clear when they began administering psychological evaluations and pharmaceutical treatments to every single person who had viewed the camera footage or participated in the investigation. Treatments that Dr. Auden Kirk immediately recognized as experimental memory suppression compounds that the Pentagon had been developing for decades, specifically to manage personnel who encountered classified information too disturbing to simply lock away with standard non-disclosure agreements. The specialists worked efficiently and without discussion, their mere presence communicating that this was a procedure they had performed many times before, and as base personnel were systematically processed through interview rooms where they received injections and were shown carefully constructed alternative explanations for what they had witnessed. It became clear that the United States government had long established protocols for handling exactly this type of incident. Protocols refined through decades of practice at making the impossible disappear from official records and from the memories of everyone who encountered it firsthand. On March 24th, under cover of darkness and with airspace cleared for 50 miles in every direction under the pretense of a classified munitions test, a C-5 Galaxy cargo aircraft landed at Elmendorf and was immediately directed to Hangar 18, where Dustoff 7-9er was loaded aboard using specialized equipment that handled the helicopter as if it were radioactive material requiring extreme contamination, protocols, and isolation from normal matter. Major Kwan, who had been permitted to observe the loading operation only after signing documents that carried automatic death penalty provisions for any disclosure of classified information she might acquire, noticed that the transport crew wore dosimeters typically used for radiation exposure monitoring, and that they placed 7-9er inside a containment structure that appeared to be lined with materials designed to block electromagnetic fields and possibly other forms of energy or dimensional bleed-through that standard physics had no terminology to describe. Mr. Garrison informed Colonel Vance that the aircraft would be transported to a secure facility in Nevada for further analysis, though he did not specify which facility or acknowledge whether he was referring to Nellis Air Force Base Groom Lake or one of the other rumored installations that conspiracy theorists obsessed over, but that official government records insisted did not exist for purposes that official government statements insisted did not require such facilities. Before departing, Garrison provided Vance with a complete fabricated incident report that explained 7-9er's disappearance as a navigation error that had led the helicopter to crash in a remote valley where extreme weather conditions had prevented immediate recovery, with the crew's bodies having been located and returned to their families for private burial after recovery teams finally reached the site once conditions improved. And he made clear that this narrative was not optional or subject to debate, but rather was now the official historical record that would appear in all military documents, all investigation files, and all communications with the families of the 4 crew members who had vanished and returned as empty shells that breathed and possessed heartbeats, but no longer contained whatever makes a human being fully human. The families were told their loved ones had died in the crash, and closed casket military funerals were conducted with full honors at Arlington National Cemetery, where bodies that looked exactly like Captain Rebecca Salisbury, Lieutenant James Brenner, Staff Sergeant Louise Vega, and Petty Officer Amy Thornton were buried in graves that would be tended by groundskeepers for generations to come, while the actual physical forms of those 4 people were transported to a medical facility whose location appeared in no government database and whose staff specialized in caring for patients who remained biologically alive while showing 0 higher brain function. Patients who breathed and digested food and maintained homeostasis, but who stared endlessly at nothing with eyes that occasionally tracked movements as if seeing something that existed in a completely different dimension from the rooms where their bodies were. Kept in beds that were never supposed to be empty, but somehow were despite being physically occupied. Major Kwan was transferred to a Pentagon position that required her to relocate to Washington, D.C. within 72 hours, given no opportunity to return to her apartment in Anchorage or collect personal belongings that were later shipped to her in boxes with evidence of thorough searching and removal of any materials deemed sensitive by whoever had conducted the inspection. And her new assignment placed her in an office deep within the Pentagon's classified sublevels, where she joined a staff of 14 other analysts who all shared similar backgrounds. Each had investigated an incident involving unexplained phenomena in military contexts. Each had encountered evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality, and each had been quietly reassigned to a department whose official designation was Historical Documentation Review, but whose actual purpose was to monitor and catalog ongoing incidents worldwide that fit specific patterns suggesting non-human intelligence operating with purposes that remained opaque despite 7 decades of military observation and analysis. On her second day in the new position, Kwan was provided access to a database containing over 3,000 incident reports from 42 countries spanning the previous 73 years, reports that described entities, craft, phenomena, and encounters that shared disturbing similarities despite occurring across vast distances and time periods. And as she began reading through cases from Peru, from Russia, from Australia, from Pakistan, she realized that what had happened to Dustoff 7-9er was not an isolated incident or even a rare occurrence, but rather was part of a pattern that had been continuing for possibly centuries or millennia, a pattern that suggested something vast and incomprehensibly powerful had been operating on Earth for longer than human civilization had existed, something that occasionally reached down and took people for purposes that military scientists had been trying desperately to understand since the moment they first acknowledged that these incidents were real, and that the official policy of denial and ridicule was a protective lie told to populations that would destabilize completely if they understood the actual nature of reality they inhabited. She found reports of aircraft returning without crews, ships found drifting with meals still warm on tables, but every soul aboard vanished, military bases where entire personnel rosters disappeared, overnight leaving only footprints that ended abruptly as if people had been plucked from the ground by invisible hands, and in every case the same pattern official explanations that satisfied. The public families told comfortable lies, and the people who knew the truth quietly transferred to positions where they could continue investigating phenomena that governments acknowledged privately while denying publicly, maintaining a conspiracy of silence, not because they wanted to hide the truth, but because they genuinely believed that humanity was not psychologically prepared to accept that we share our planet with something so far beyond our understanding, that we are to it what insects are to us, and that occasionally it reaches down and takes specimens for examination with the same casual disregard for our autonomy and well-being that we show in collecting ants from the ground too. Study under microscopes in elementary school science classrooms. The official accident report filed with the National Transportation Safety Board attributed the loss of Dustoff's 79er to pilot error during adverse weather conditions, claiming Captain Salisbury had crashed in a remote valley with all 4 crew members killed on impact. Their remains returned to families after a difficult recovery operation that required specialized alpine rescue teams and weeks of dangerous work in extreme conditions. The names of Rebecca, Salisbury, James Brenner, Lise Vega, and Amy Thornton were added to the Air Force Memorial Wall with full military honors, while closed casket funerals were conducted at Arlington National Cemetery, where grieving families were told their loved ones had died serving their country in a tragic but explainable accident. The truth remained locked in classified files, accessible only to 17 individuals with presidential-level clearance. The actual bodies of those 4 crew members continued breathing in a medical facility that officially did not exist, cared for by staff who had signed documents carrying automatic death penalty provisions for disclosure bodies that maintained vital signs and biological functions but showed zero higher brain activity, as if whatever made them human had been surgically extracted and taken somewhere the human understanding could not follow. Major Kwan was transferred to a Pentagon position, where she joined 13 other analysts in a department officially designated Historical Documentation Review, but actually tasked with cataloging over 3,000 similar incidents from 42 countries spanning 7 decades, incidents that revealed a disturbing pattern suggesting something vast and incomprehensibly powerful had been operating on Earth far longer than human civilization had existed. Something that occasionally reached down to take specimens for purposes that remained completely opaque despite 70 years of military investigation using humanity's most sophisticated analytical capabilities. In the years following the incident, 19 of the 43 personnel directly involved in investigating 79er died under suspicious circumstances: suicides with no prior mental health history, single-car accidents on clear days, sudden onset of early dementia in individuals with no genetic predisposition, while 12 others required permanent psychiatric institutionalization after developing obsessive behaviors, like Dr. Audenberg, who spent his days in an Oregon facility, drawing the same image repeatedly until staff removed all writing implements. A massive hand reaching down from clouds, an image he eventually began scratching into his own skin when paper was denied him. The remaining survivors, including Lieutenant Colonel Kwan, reported recurring dreams of being watched from above and knowing with absolute certainty that whatever had taken those 4 crew members was still operating with complete impunity, that it could take any of them at any moment, and that no military power or government authority could defend against entities whose purposes humanity could not fathom and whose capabilities we could not match. The camera footage from 79er remains stored in a Pentagon vault, requiring presidential authorization to access. Viewed only twice since 2004, once when a new Secretary of Defense demanded justification for the enormous black budget allocation for phenomena investigation, and once when rising public interest in UFOs forced preparation of classified congressional briefings explaining why official denial policies existed for legitimate national security reasons rather than institutional secrecy. Both viewings resulted in immediate expansion of monitoring program funding and renewed commitment to maintaining public narratives dismissing these incidents as weather balloons or misidentified aircraft, because the alternative, admitting that something impossibly vast operates in Earth's skies with freedom to take human beings whenever it chooses, that our technology and power are completely ineffective against these entities, and that the missing may still exist somewhere being used for purposes we cannot comprehend, would fundamentally destroy the social stability allowing civilization to function. And so the lies continue. Families grieve believing their loved ones died in accidents, and personnel like Lieutenant Colonel Kwan spend careers documenting incidents that governments acknowledge privately while denying publicly, maintaining humanity's comfortable illusion of security while knowing that somewhere above the Alaskan wilderness Above oceans and deserts and mountains across the entire world, the hands continue reaching down through reality to take people for purposes that 7 decades of investigation have brought us no closer to understanding, and that every cleared sky might hide something vast and aware, waiting patiently for the next specimen to examine, the next consciousness to extract, the next empty body to return to a world that will never understand what was lost or acknowledge that the taking ever occurred at all. Don't forget to follow our channel for more military encounters. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into phenomena that defy everything we've been taught about reality. And subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to accept official explanations that ignore overwhelming evidence.